Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Welcome back to my YouTube channel, everybody. For this week's video, I am going to present something that I have wanted to do for some time now. When I first moved into this current home, around 2.5 years ago, I quickly noticed a very interesting industry alongside the road that I travel every Sunday morning to go to church. And I thought right from the beginning that that would be a fantastic industry to model on my own railroad. Not only that, but if you go back to the layout plan that I presented some time ago, I even have a site picked out specifically for this one industry. So let's now head out to the center of Milan and take a look at the Milan Box Corporation.
Well, here is the view from the road bridge that goes over the main line beside the complex. The track on the left is the main line, the one on the right is the passing siding. And as can clearly be seen, the spur is still in place, although the turnout has been removed. Further in the distance, there is a second loading dock, which I will show you from the other side later on in the video. Well, this is a view from about halfway up the ramp on the road bridge. I found a gap in the trees, and I thought I'd actually be able to see more through the trees than I can, but I'm going to include it anyway. Here's a view from further down the road. I'm just going to slowly pan around and see virtually the whole complex in this shot. Right now we're looking at the office.
Well, now I am at the grade crossing that I could see from the bridge earlier. In the distance there is the road bridge that I made the other clip from. We've got two tracks heading over the grade crossing, and here is the angled loading dock that I could see from the distance. And looking closely, this also still has the spur in place, but with the turnout removed. And this is another interesting side of the building. A load of lumber and pallets on the loading dock, and quite an interesting mix of roof lines along the back. I'm going to shoot another panoramic view from further down. Which is probably the more interesting view.
Here is the satellite image of the Milan Box Corporation. It's located fairly close to the center of Milan, Tennessee. And as you can see from the scale in the corner, it's not a particularly compact industry. If you wanted to model it full size in HO scale, you'd need a space somewhere in the region of 6 feet by 12. But the vast majority of it could be completely eliminated and just the interesting parts built in a much smaller space. The main line runs beside it in a north-south direction, and in this location most of the streets are at about a 45-degree angle to it. I will return to this satellite view later with some additional thoughts. But now let's take a look at some of the photographs that I shot recently. The name of the company is the Milan Box Corporation. There is a location on my own layout in the town of Eastleigh, which looks like it might be a good spot. And of course then I would rename the industry to Eastleigh Box Corporation. Here we are looking at the office, which is right in the east corner of the plant. Obviously the office would be one of the first locations to be eliminated from the model, but I just include it for completeness. Here is a view of the production side of the industry, looking from more or less the same spot, but with the camera turned to face west. We can see a variety of interesting structures and various pipework and what I assume are dust collectors. Here's a slightly different view of the same scene, taken from a little bit further up the road. Here's a view through the trees, taken towards the north, with the storage sheds in the distance, and one corner of the production building in the foreground. Here we see some open-sided storage sheds. Building all the truss work for such a structure would be a challenge, but it would be a very interesting model once it was done. This is another view of more or less the same area, but showing the dust extraction system in a little bit more detail. And I guess this is where the power supply comes into the complex, all these power masts and transformers right in the middle of the view, with a good view of the various wires and pipes behind it. Here is a close-up of the main dust extractor. I really like this contraption, and this is what really drew my attention to the complex in the first place when I started driving by it some 2.5 years ago. And this would be a fun scratch building project. The smaller dust collector to the left looks exactly like a detail part available from Walthers, as supplied with their flour mill kit or as a separate detail add-on. Here is the other one, and although this one looks to be a little bit smaller, it is for some reason on a very tall gantry. And this would be a great opportunity to add some height to the building, along with the tall but slender smokestack in front of it. This is a view of the main dust extractor from the far side, with the loading dock in the foreground. And here's a back view of the other one. This view is taken from the bridge where West Van Hook Street runs over the main lines. You can see one of the loading docks in the middle of the picture. The other one is beyond it, hidden by trees. And although the rails are still in place at the loading dock, the turnout has been removed, and there is no longer any sign of it. Although interestingly enough, I did about 2 years ago see a couple of freight cars parked on the siding at this point. Now I don't know whether they developed a fault and had to be set out of the train, or whether the box company needed a one-time shipment by rail, even after the turnout had been removed. Maybe somebody who works for the railroad company would know that. Here is a closer view of that spur. And although it does not look as though there are any loading doors in this first building, I suspect that there may be in that low-roofed area at the back behind the trees at the end of the spur. Of course, maybe the structures here have changed since they went over to road shipment. Here's another view from a slightly different angle. And in this picture, you can actually see the second loading dock in the distance, which also still has the track alongside it, but with the turnout removed. And one more picture from a slightly different angle. I may as well include it, just in case it shows any extra details that the other one didn't. Now, the next few photographs, you can't really see a lot through the trees, but I'll include them anyway, just for completeness. I'm just going to skim over them quickly. You can pause them if there's any details that you want to see. Here is a view from the grade crossing in the northeast corner of the site. In the distance, you can see the road bridge that I took some pictures from earlier. Here is a close-up of the rear loading dock. Looks like this was thrown together and modified several times during its career, and it appears to have been extended in the far distance. There is a close-up of the far end of it, and we can also see the end of the other spur in this view. One thing that's a lot more visible from the rear than from the road is the many different levels on the roof, which all make for a very interesting structure. Here is another view of some of the pipework and roof vents. This is the north side of the buildings. Again, it looks like it was added to on numerous occasions. And here is a much wider view showing the bulk of the industry. Okay, I said I would return to the satellite view, and here it is. And although this industry is rather too large for the amount of traffic that it would generate. It doesn't have to be modelled in its entirety. The vast majority of the road side of it can be eliminated completely, and the main trackside buildings can be selectively compressed. Here is a slightly tighter view, turned around into the orientation that would most likely be most suited to a model railroad situation, with the main line running in front of it and the industry behind. And as I mentioned earlier, there is a site in one of the towns of the layout that I'm designing for my basement that I have earmarked for this industry. Here is a much tighter cropped view of the part of the industry that I think I would like to model. Here is virtually all the interesting part, and this could be selectively compressed into an area probably about 12 inches by 30. And that's what I plan to do on my own layout, assuming I ever get time to build it.
Well, that's all for this week. This video has been something completely different from anything I've ever produced before, and I hope that it finds some interest in my viewer base. So I'm just going to sign off here. Hope you enjoy the show. Hope to see you again next week. Thanks for watching, and bye for now.